Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So, it's been almost a decade since the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, and this was a pivotal step that aimed to galvanize nations to address climate change. And whilst this agreement has succeeded in rallying governments and fostering collaboration, our progress is not what we hoped for. As 2024 comes to a close, it's said to be one of the hottest years on record, actually the hottest year on record, bringing us perilously close to breaching the critical threshold of 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. Now, greenhouse gas concentrations in our atmosphere actually continue to rise unabated with no clear signs of peaking. And in light of these sobering realities, it may be time to re-examine not only our strategies, but our collective commitment to mitigating the crisis. Now, in 2006, the Spiritual Science Research Foundation published pioneering articles on climate change, and it forewarned of a rapid escalation in climatic extremes unlike anything witnessed in recent history. These predictions, based on spiritual research methodologies and mentored by His Holiness Dr. Arthavle, are now unfolding before our eyes. And unlike conventional scientific approaches, spiritual research offers a holistic perspective addressing not only the physical and psychological dimensions of an issue, but also the often overlooked spiritual dimension. Now, by delving into the root causes of climate phenomena, our research has revealed insights that differ from mainstream scientific narratives, providing a more comprehensive understanding of how we should actually focus our efforts. And today I want to share this research with you and what we feel will help us and protect us and mitigate the onslaught of climate change and the rise of global temperatures. Now, before we get started, I'd like to familiarize you with a few subtle concepts from sacred Indian texts. And the first concept is that as per the science of spirituality, there are three subtle basic components in the universe, which are namely Sattva, Raja, and Tama. And these subtle components are more basic than even the smallest physical particles, and they exist in everything, tangible or intangible. Their proportion determines the spiritual vibrations that emits from anything. So a predominance of the Sattva component instills spiritual knowledge and spiritual purity in a person. The Raja component incites action, and the Tama component incites or induces spiritual impurity. So whatever the dominant subtle component is in any object or situation or anything like that, that is how the vibrations will actually be emitted from that. The second concept I'd like to discuss with you are the 5 cosmic principles of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And these principles are literally the building blocks of creation. They've been referenced widely in ancient Indian scriptures and are known as the Pancha Mahabhutas. So for anything related to climate change, that is natural disasters, extreme weather events, these cosmic principles would be involved, and hence it is vital that we understand them to a greater degree. The third concept I'd like to speak to you about, which is not very often talked about, but it's the nature of the universe and that it goes through cycles and mini cycles of time. Now, these are periods known as yugs in Sanskrit. At a micro level, we see such cycles in a 24-hour period where there is day and there is night. And both of them have their own spiritual properties. Nighttime, of course, is darker. It's also filled with more spiritually impure vibrations, or is Raja Tama predominant. And during the day, which is more sattvic, it is also more spiritually purer. So this is the interesting part, is that the activities of people and what they undertake during day and night is largely tempered and influenced by the spiritual properties of that time period. Now, if you zoom back and look at it at a macro level, just like this, Earth also goes through cyclical changes that are primarily spiritual in nature. And these cycles can last anywhere between hundreds of years to hundreds of thousands of years. Now, when a cycle is at its upper end, there is more of the sattva components, more spiritually pure. And when it's at its lower end, just before the new cycle starts, the tama predominant nature of the cycle actually becomes largely evident, and there is maximum amount of spiritual impurity. So this is a very important point, is that we are currently at the low phase of one of these mini cycles, and we are about to transition to a new era or a cycle, which is happening while we attend this COP29. And before this happens, we will all be affected by the increased tama component in the environment. And I'd like to now share with you how this low phase of the cycle will be affecting us. And the first one I'd like to share with you is the low phase of the cycle. It affects the sattva, raja, and tama components. So there's an increase in the tama component, and the increase in the tama component, basically there's a destabilization that happens there on the 5 cosmic principles of ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And once there is a destabilization of this, it basically goes and affects the weather patterns, and that's why we get erratic climate change and erratic weather patterns. Now, this next slide shows each of these cosmic principles and how they actually affect the weather patterns. So as you can see out here, an increase, or if the earth element is affected adversely, it can cause earthquakes, rise and fall of land, landslides, water, you get floods, tsunamis. With fire, of course, you get the 1.5 degrees centigrade, and we're going perilously close to it. And this is another interesting slide that we got through spiritual research. For good weather to occur, the proportion of sattva, raja, and tama, that is the spiritually pure component versus the impure component, is 40-30-30. The current state in November 2024 is 30-30-40. Okay? And for extreme weather events to actually start unfolding in the earth, which will probably happen in the next decade, is 25, 25, and 50. Now, the other thing that gets negatively affected by this low phase of the cycle is human behavior. And the negativity in the environment has a negative impact on people's decision making and makes them perform like a lower version of themselves. So this results in man being more materialistic, ignoring and abusing the environment for profit. And it can also lead to social unrest, polarization, skirmishes, and war, pretty much what we're seeing nowadays. So if we had to look at the causes of climate change, this is where we differ from the scientific narrative. If we had to look at the causes of climate change holistically, then this is the breakdown of the factors. 98% of the causes are due to cyclical changes that the Earth is currently transitioning through, and only 2% is actually because of normal human behavior. But this 98% then breaks down into two parts. 67% of it, that's two-thirds of it, is because of the three subtle components of the universe actually affecting the five cosmic principles. So for example, if the absolute fire principle is affected adversely, it results in increase in temperatures. And the 33% is the human behavior which is influenced or tempered by the era that we're currently living in, and therefore making humans neglect the environment or abuse the environment in ways just for their own profit. Now, if we go to the time frame for the climate change escalation, so I've given you a background about the root causes and that they're predominantly cyclical, they're predominantly spiritual in nature. But how quickly can we expect an escalation of this? Now, compared to earlier models at the time of the Paris Agreement, climate change is progressing at a faster rate than previously anticipated, and its impacts are more widespread and severe than models initially predicted. Now, this rapid escalation is actually in alignment with what spiritual research conducted by SSRF predicted in 2006. Because the root causes are not only physical, but they are actually spiritual in nature. And so just as we spring clean our house to eliminate accumulated dirt, nature strives to restore balance when the spiritual pollution starts to reach critical levels. And this restorative process often manifests through extreme weather events and natural forces. Now, as per spiritual research, the window for preventing catastrophic tipping points, that is irreversible changes with large-scale consequences, is basically narrowing. And these events could peak within the next few years to at the most a decade. Of course, there are factors playing in the background which could influence them, but this is the general time frame. And humanity basically faces an urgent call of action where we must accelerate mitigation measures and prepare for intensifying effects of climate change to safeguard our future. So now I would like to go to solutions. I would like to start by quoting James Gustav Speth, an American environmental lawyer, part of the academic community, who actually recognized the spiritual aspect. And what he said was, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And I thought that 30 years of good science would address these problems. But he said I was wrong. The top environmental problems are actually selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists and the governments of the world don't know how to do that. Now, actually, this is not a new concept, okay? It's been something that has been explained in ancient Indian Sanskrit scriptures, like out here you can see in the Charak Samhita. It's stated that when there is an increase in unrighteousness, or basically an increase in the spiritual pollution in society, the signs are affected in the reduced quality of life. Now, by quality of life, I don't mean the gadgets and the technology and the money. I'm talking about the mental aspect of people. The reduced quality of life, increased epidemics, in our case it was pandemics, a spate of natural disasters which are currently unfolding, along with war and conflict, eventually leading to the annihilation of communities. So this was written thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, before I go there, basically what the world needs to understand, and efforts are being made at the physical level, are just not good enough. We need to make efforts also at a spiritual level. And for this, we need to make active efforts to increase sattvikta or spiritual purity, both in our lives and in the environment. And this is basically the tenet of what ancient Indian culture was based on. and is widely documented in Indian knowledge systems. Now what I'd like to share with you is tangible examples of how the 5 cosmic principles are affected by spiritual purity. And in this slide, you can basically see 2 flames. Both these flames are from a sacred fire, also known as a yajna. On the left, it's conducted by a regular priest in a regular environment. The flame on the right, both the flames, exactly the same constitution of materials and everything, but you can see how different they are. The flame on the right is at the Spiritual Research Center in Ashram, and it's also being conducted by a saint, not a priest, but a saint. So you can see automatically the difference in the texture of the flame, the symmetry, everything, but you can also see at a vibrational level that the flame on the right is far more positive in its vibrations. And this is basically an example of how the fire element modifies its behavior based on the spiritual purity in the environment. Another example, I'll ask my good friend behind to play this. I just explained to you what you just saw. These are exactly the same situations conducted by exactly the same priests, okay? But on this slide, there was no mantra, and on that side, there were mantras being recited. The concoction of materials, that is ghee or clarified butter from an Indian cow and milk being put together, is exactly the same. But when mantras were being recited, the flame goes through an extraordinary level of height. And what mantras are basically very sattvic or very spiritually pure kind of mediums to generate positive energy. And this is another example of that. I'll share another one with you. These are 2 bottles of water from 2 adjacent flats in Mumbai. And the water on the left-hand side has positive aura with it, and the water on the right-hand side has a negative aura associated. Now, we measured these auras using something known as an aura and energy scanner, the universal aura scanner. It's developed by a nuclear scientist. And the only difference between these 2 bottles of water is the people in the residence. On the left-hand side, the people were undertaking spiritual practice on a daily basis, as per universal spiritual principles. The one on the right, the person who was leading a nice worldly life, has absolutely no regard for any concept of spirituality. And it told on the water that actually passed through their house. The important point is this is exactly the same water source, the municipal pipe running from one house to the other house, but it changes the dynamics, the spiritual dynamics of the water. And again, basically what this shows is that we as a human race have the power to influence the environment and the elements around us by our decisions and our activities. One last example. You can see 5 glasses of water out here. If I offer these 5 glasses of water to you, you'd probably choose 1 or 5 because they look the cleanest. But now if I tell you, out of the 1,000 samples that we collected worldwide, this was in the top 5 most negatively spiritually polluted glasses. And the ones that were the 3 and 4, they were actually one of the most spiritually positive water samples. Okay? And this highlights another principle, that just because something is physically impure, it doesn't mean that it's spiritually impure. And just because something is physically pure or it looks very sanitized, doesn't mean that it's spiritually pure. 2 different paradigms that we're working with. I'd like to now come to direct solutions. One of the most effective ways basically what I'm trying to say is that when we make efforts to increase our collective consciousness, which basically means increasing the spiritual purity around us and the environment, we have the best chance of mitigating the effect of climate change and its destructive phase. And one of the best ways to do this, to increase spiritual purity in us and our environment, is to practice spirituality but spirituality that's based on universal principles. So just like we have physical principles like the law of gravity, and defying the law of gravity, you know what happens. In the same manner, we have spiritual principles that are universal in nature, and that one has to align their spiritual practice to these principles. We suggest chanting the name of God, as it is a very simple yet effective spiritual practice that imbibes both positive energy and removes negativity. It's a practice that can be done continuously. It can be done in one's mind. It also results in the purification of the mind and generates the ability to make better decisions. Conducting Agnihotra, this is like a mini sacred fire, but it has tremendous amount of spiritual benefits. It's been widely documented by the scientific community too, and enhances spiritual purity in the premises. And last but not the least, it requires a different way of thinking. Now, I know that this solution is going to take time, but it's absolutely necessary for a positive outcome and requires education of the population. For example, the Indian government has undertaken steps in the right direction by promoting ancient Indian knowledge systems within the modern curricula. And this ensures that the ancient wisdom is passed down to newer generations. But for us at COP29, what can this actually mean? For example, currently we focus on who's the biggest world polluters. And we also say polluters by capita, correct? But we also should be asking ourselves the question, who's the biggest spiritual polluter? And by adding so much of levels of Rajatama into the air, how are they actually pulling us back? Climate finance, the second point, is also a major issue. And it's being discussed and debated widely in this COP29. But how much of this finance will go towards educating society on how to live a spiritually purer way of life that does not harm the environment spiritually and will actually restore balance in the 5 cosmic principles, leading to normalcy in weather patterns? Now, the important thing is this education will generate an enthusiasm within, that you don't have to be forced or caught by the neck to do something. It'll automatically happen from within. Those countries that continue to pollute the environment and don't take active measures to reduce their carbon footprint at the cost of other nations will incur karmic repercussions, the law of karma basically, give and take, which will add adverse collective destiny to that nation. And the leaders of every nation have a tremendous responsibility, which they mostly are not aware of from this paradigm point of view, is because the decisions that they will make will either help or adversely impact the collective destiny of that country. National determined contributions should also consider the contribution of spiritual purity, because every sustainable goal, every sustainable development goal should also meet the goals of generating spiritual purity or reducing spiritual impurity. And that, in fact, is what is actually true sustainable development and real corporate social responsibility. So also in the carbon market, the generation of spiritual purity should also be considered as a medium to gain credence. So that brings me to my last slide. And basically, in conclusion, the storm clouds of climate change are gathering. We can all see it, the writings on the wall. But they also present to us a unique opportunity to redefine our nature with our planet, our Mother Earth, and also with each other. And they also say that for every cloud, there is a silver lining. The challenges that we've faced in the past few years, that's with COVID, extreme weather events, war, I feel they've not gone in vain. There's been a growing sense of introspection in the world community, and also a sense of awakening within us that there simply has to be a better way. So let us pray that this momentum continues and generates spiritual seekers in humanity. And with the baton that time has entrusted our generation, that's us, with. I pray that we run the race of our lives to protect Mother Earth, both for us and for future generations. Now, before I end, you've seen the slide, correct? I don't know whether it's coincidence, divine intervention, but from the residence of COP29 to here, it took me almost an hour to get here, okay? For about half an hour of that time, this was the scenery outside, for half an hour. And I kept looking at it, and I said, that's my last slide. And I felt, in a way, it was divine intervention. So you can see I've taken a number of pictures. Yeah? There you go. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, otherwise I'll wrap up. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thank you to everyone watching online too.